the team members that are on the ground and working with those processes that are in place, that's where you're going to extract those key friction points. And it could be anything from workflows to route data or assets, or it could be something on the measurement side as well. And so that's why having that deeper conversation, not just with the initial stakeholder, but with the team members that are actually doing the work, makes a big difference. Once we get that figured out, the beautiful thing about the disruptive state of AI, right, to be cheesy, is that you can actually pretty easily extract where those opportunities to streamline processes live. And monetizing that is usually pretty easy too. So, that's the sort of mindset that I bring to any engagement and the way I look at it.
From my perspective, like I'm usually on the creative side, and so what I think is incredibly distracting is the talk about efficiency and streamlining, which is totally true.
Right.
Right? As you're running the business, all of these things are actually true in the fact that it's making the business more effective. But what I find that's pulling away from is the conversations about, yeah, but what about brand elevation and driving more revenue streams? Like that to me is, I find trying to drive to that more difficult, because I think most people can wrap their head around, AI doing the things that we don't want to do.
Right.
But I saw Paul, I don't know if you know Paul, he's usually in these circuits. He's probably here. He had a post about, if you're looking at AI to just automate your mundane, you're playing small.
Right.
I thought that was an incredibly insightful way of looking at it, because from our perspective, it's like, how can you use all of this disruption? We know that we can use this disruption to actually elevate brand and elevate revenue streams.
Yeah.
But like those conversations are like, getting to that spot is incredibly difficult.
Yeah, I think I always like the metaphor. It's like synthesizers in the 80s in music. Is that Flock of Seagulls was a good band, but they get lumped in with all these other bands that were like oversaturated in the market with synth pop. And like it really did accelerate the creative pace that things were coming out. And so there is this, like, we're going through a similar phase right now to weed out what's really good. We all know that Depeche Mode probably emerged as the leader, and there's no argument that their creative abilities were accelerated by synthesizers. And I think that's the same is true when we think about that paradigm that you just introduced, right? Like, if we just eliminate or streamline processes that were mundane using AI, we're getting to that like entry level, one hit wonder of synth pop in the 80s. I'm working with a company now that is looking at it from that lens of elevating the brand. And so what we're doing is taking a look at their brand identity process that they're doing for their clients. These are guys that have been doing this for decades and really counts. They have a lot of, what's the word I'm looking for? Tribal expertise. I think that's the underselling, like the expertise they bring. And so what we're looking at is, okay, we can of course streamline the mundane, but how do we take your expertise and your vision and scale that? And that is what is really incredible about the most recent innovations that we're seeing across a lot of the mainstream LLMs, like OpenAI, is just, whether it's integrating DALL-E into it, or the ability to generate code at scale, like fast, good code. I mean, if you've got a good vision that you can start with, you can execute what seem like mundane tasks, but it done with a good level of orchestration, like you can scale some really impressive work. What is it? There's a AI video competition, like film festival, that happens every year. And if you look at what people are doing with film and AI, there's no question that it's accelerating the creative process.
Yeah, you know, from one of the things that I see is you, I walk into situations where, from a creative supply chain perspective, it's almost like they have decades of, we make our pizzas in New York, but all of our customers are in Los Angeles. So we have to figure out ways to keep them heated as we move them across the country for delivery. And we're at a stage now where you can just send the recipe to like Los Angeles.
Right.
But the mental, it's more of a mental construct of not thinking that's possible, because how could it possibly be? Because forever in my entire career, we've always had our trucks going across America to ship these heated pizzas to Los Angeles. So breaking down those mental constructs is, you know, we start with this thing like where you have to forget everything you know and start over. That's why I think in our organization, the younger people that are coming out, like we have somebody who's fresh out of college, they don't have that baggage of the decades of how it used to be. So, you know, they get it quicker. But I just like, those are the messaging choices that are difficult for us to check. How can you keep refining your message to say, hey, this is possible and this is where you should be like heading, you know?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it is an interesting challenge, right? Because in a traditional, pitch, you're pitching to try to transform somebody's way of thinking.
And they want it in micro increments.
Yes.
They don't want it. They don't want. Somebody was saying, "Give me thin slices of cheese." Like, how do you give thin slices of cheese to when Uber hit the taxi cab industry?
Yeah.
There was no thin slice of cheese there. And then what do you say to the taxi cab companies? You know, coming back to taxi cabs, it's interesting. It's like, you have to have the mechanic on duty to maintain the cars. So when you're then going to a new company to talk about Uber, and they're like, yeah, but what is our mechanic needs to have it in the shop for this 25? Like, no, you don't have the mechanic in the shop. And then people resonate to it. Well, everybody's going to lose their jobs. Well, it's not that. It's like you're losing the stuff you don't want to deal with anyway. But then that gets us back into the efficiency thing.
Yeah.
And everybody goes there. And then we're back into Paul's thing of, you're playing small because you're just trying to do the things you don't want to do. But coming back to elevating the brand, it's just, it's really difficult.
So I had a conversation with a studio earlier this year, and I was fortunate to be able to talk to a pretty broad set of like stakeholders, right? And including the CIO. And what I found was similar to what you just described. Was there were team members that could catch the bigger vision for how they can really accelerate the content that they're syndicating to drive ticket sales, early interest in films, and then engagement with their own properties over time. And then when we would get into the nuts and bolts of it, it was a lot of friction, but like, this is the way we've done things. And it's like, okay, that's true. This is the way you've done things. I wish I had a magic formula for how to break that wall down for the mechanics, the metaphorical mechanics. I had the same experience working with a tooling company, like, one that you would find in like a Home Depot, right? The sold power tools. And they had this social media strategy that they needed to transform so that they could accelerate the pace at which they were syndicating their social media content, that have that tied into their training strategy. and I was like, if I had hair to pull out, I would have pulled it out after that meeting, because the vice president of marketing and the team in responsible for enablement, like the training on the tools, like they got it, but we got hung up by the end user that the button was in a slightly different place to click on post than what she was used to. And I was like, hold on, like, I don't understand like why this is a blockade. We've got this much bigger vision for how we can accelerate the rate at which you're doing your job, and clicking that button It should be pretty easy.
And then going to the opposite end of that spectrum, I've always found that when we go in and debut all this high-end tech, the IT department is usually, they get it immediately and are unimpressed because the math adds up. Oh, yeah, if you just do this and configure it that way, that will work. And so the IT department is both the easiest to talk to, but yet the least impressed.
Yeah.
And all of the, the creative side is like, really impressed, but they're trying to fit it back into their world. So it's always a really interesting conversation to try to get through.
It is, and I think that when I've experienced literally that same thing. I remember so vividly so many conversations with IT folks that they were like, yeah, I mean, that's what it's supposed to do.
Didn't it work this way before?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've had that one too. I thought it already worked that way.
Yeah.
It should work.
It happened on the cloud migration side of things, right? Like they had their questions, but like if you would walk them through the cloud architecture, they would be like, yeah, like that's right. But I think that was on the cloud side of things, that was the inflection point for driving adoption. It was like, yeah, that's the way it's supposed to work. Oh, okay, great. Well, let's move to the cloud. Yeah, it's funny when I think about like those conversations. If I could turn back the clock, I would almost turn on a different persona for each of those conversations.
Exactly.
And
we talk about that a lot. How do you identify the persona? Exactly.
yeah,
Exactly. Right on, man. Good to see you.
absolutely.
Glad you were able to stop by.
It's always good to talk to you. I think that of all the friendships I've made in this industry, this one
Nice.
is probably
you
the
helped me
most
out.
lopsided. I learned so much from
No,
you.
no. You've helped me out a lot. You trust me. You helped me out a lot. Believe me. Yeah, right on, man. Good to see you. Right on.